There are a lot of reasons why one might find themselves in a situation with a saltwater or even a freshwater aquarium where they have to set up a quarantine tank for some fish or some other animals to keep those animals out of the main display, maybe just for an observation QT or possibly even to medicate. And today, we're going to go over how to set one of those up, and it's actually a lot simpler than most people think. Let's talk about it. Basically, all you're going to need to set up a quarantine tank is what you see here on the table in front of me. Of course, you're going to need a container of some kind. You're going to want to keep an ammonia kit on hand just to be able to test the ammonia. I prefer Salifert or Red Sea, but there are some other ones out there that are going to work okay for you. You're going to need some sort of a filtration device and a flow water movement device. I like hang on the backs for a very specific reason that I'm going to get to in a little while when we start to do the setup on this QT. You're also going to need a heater and a couple of pieces of not required but equipment that I highly recommend is some sort of an auto top-off system. I like to use this gravity-fed bottle system. It's very easy to use and it doesn't cost that much to set that up. And the last piece of recommended equipment is a heater controller, something like the one that I have stuck to the back of this aquarium here. Heaters are known widely in the hobby to be a massive failure point for us. They tear up all the time, and running your heater on a separate standalone controller with its own thermostat and its own temperature probe is going to just be so much better for you in the long run than running the heater by itself that I would almost consider it a required piece of equipment. But if you have a good quality heater, you can get away without it. Let's set it up. I'm sure you've kind of already figured out by the amount of equipment that we have here that setup on this is very simple. Basically, we're going to just install our hang on the back filter right on the back, making sure that everything is where it needs to be, like so. All right, so why do I like hang on the back filters over something like a sponge filter for saltwater aquarium QT? And the simple reason is salt creep. Hang on the back filters typically create much less of this salt creep and create less of a problem for you than something like a sponge filter with an air stone or an air bubbler in it. If you use an air stone in a QT or any saltwater aquarium for that matter, what's going to happen is every time one of those little bubbles come to the surface and then it pops, it sends a little bit of salt water over onto a surface, on the wall behind, on the rim of the aquarium, on the table in the front, everywhere. And then when that little drop of salt water evaporates, it leaves the salt behind. That's called salt creep. And after a couple of weeks, couple of months, many months of running a saltwater aquarium, it can be a massive mess. And it's very easy to avoid this problem using something like a hang on the back in your quarantine setup because it doesn't create all those micro bubbles. And in saltwater and in freshwater, it provides enough surface agitation to make sure that the water has enough oxygen content for the fish to be good. Take our heater, put it in the back, just like that. Now this heater works fine vertically, but you may want to install your heater horizontally. That works better. Either way is fine. Just go with whatever the manufacturer of your heater recommends. Installing this little ATO bracket is super simple. I 3D printed this off of Thingiverse. You're going to want to use PETG filament to print for aquarium stuff. That just clips right onto the back. Couple of little thumb screws, tighten that up. There's a link in the description if you want to go find this thing and print one for yourself. Take the bottle. Once the aquarium is full and running, as evaporation occurs and the water level goes down, when it goes down just enough, it's going to automatically refill from this bottle. So you fill this bottle up with fresh, clean RODI water, flip it quickly up, and screw it down into the bracket just like that. Now that's just going to sit there like that and take care of your evaporation. This system for me lasts about a week before I have to refill this bottle, and that's pretty cool. At this point, the only thing left for you to do is put water in the aquarium, either fresh or salt, whichever one applies to you, and the only other thing you need to add is some sort of a hide for the fish to give them a place to feel secure and away from any possible problems that they might perceive. Most often, people use PVC fittings for that. Make sure they're good and clean, and then you can just put a few PVC fittings in the bottom of the tank, and that's really all they need. Now, let's talk about a couple of different key points when you're quarantining fish for why you want to do certain things and not do other things. All right, so one of the things that I see people ask, probably more than anything else, is should a quarantine tank be cycled? So here's the thing. QT tanks are meant to be a sterile environment. They're meant to be like a hospital type setting for your fish. If it's going to be just an observation QT, you got some new fish in, you want them to go into a system just to keep them for a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, just to make sure that they're not sick and you're not going to be medicating the fish, then you can run a cycled QT. You could even have sand and rocks in it, and basically it just be like a normal setup. And you put the fish in there, you make sure it's safe and healthy to go into your main display. And once you move the fish, then you just let it run a while by itself with nothing, and it's good to go. But if you're going to be medicating the fish with just about anything, you don't want those substrates in that aquarium, in that QT, because sand and especially live rock, if it's very porous, even more so, that's going to absorb the medications that you're putting into the QT, and it's not going to allow those medications to be available to the fish in the water column, which is why I recommend that you don't cycle a quarantine tank. So if that's being the case, what do you do about ammonia? That's why I recommend having a good, high quality ammonia test kit with your QT setup, either Salifert or Red Sea. HANA test kits are absolutely amazing, but my problem with HANA kits is that they are so sensitive that sometimes they will have you chasing micro parts of numbers that you really don't even need to be worried about. But because it shows up on the test kit and it's not flat zero, it makes people go down the road of, I think I need to do something about this, which is actually not the case. In a quarantine setup, anytime your ammonia gets to 0.25, then you're going to want to do a 50% water change. This is also the reason why I recommend that quarantine setups are small, either like 5, maybe a maximum of 10 gallons. You don't want these tanks to be really big because you are probably going to be doing multiple 50% water changes on them. And it's a lot cheaper to change 2.5 gallons of water rather than changing 20 gallons of water if you had like a 40 breeder as your QT. But you have to keep the life of the animal in mind, and if you're quarantining really big fish, then you're going to need a bigger setup for sure. And so let's talk about a couple of points about how long do you want to quarantine fish. So if you get a fish from the fish store and you put it in your quarantine and you start seeing those white spots on it, right? This could either be ick or it could be velvet or potentially even Brooklinella or some other diseases. Each one of those problems is going to have a different treatment method and also a different amount of time that you're going to be treating for, and then a different amount of observation time after the treatment is complete. Ick and velvet and Brooklinella and others, they're all different, and you're going to have to look up the specific information on each one of those things and how to ID them. But here's a really quick sort of crash course in how to ID these things. The general guideline that we go by is if there's white spots on the fish and you can count the white spots, it's probably ick. If there's white spots and they're super tiny and there's so many of them that you can't count them, that's probably velvet. And if the fish has a very pale, almost white looking coating on its skin, and that might even be peeling off a little bit, that's probably Brooklinella. But you're going to have to do some digging and do some research here to make sure that you properly identify what you have going on so that you know how to properly treat the fish. In some cases, you might have to keep that fish in that quarantine setup for 7, 8, maybe even 9 weeks just to make sure that you don't import that pathogen into your display tank. And trust me, it sounds like a long time, but you would much, much rather stop Brooklinella while it's in quarantine than have to deal with it, getting all of your fish out of a main display like this and quarantining everything for double that amount of time because you just went a little bit too fast. Something else that you can do during this time of quarantine to speed things along is raise the temperature just a little bit. If you're going to run your, QT tank normally at 78 degrees, you could raise it up to like 80, 81, or even 82 degrees. This is going to speed up the life cycle of that pathogen that you're trying to get rid of, which in the end is going to just speed up everything that you're trying to accomplish. But stick to that same sort of 7-week, 8-week scenario, because even if the fish has gotten rid of the pathogen, you need to wait that long just to be sure. And hey, I'd really like to thank my YouTube channel members for continuing to support me every month. It makes all of this possible. It makes it possible for me to keep doing this and helping you guys succeed and demystify reef keeping. If you want to become a channel member, hit the join button on the homepage. There's a bunch of different tiers for you to choose from, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, there's a reason that I don't have water in this quarantine system yet, and it's because I have a project coming up that's going to have some very surprising fish in it. So this QT is actually getting set up as a freshwater sort of quarantine system first, and it's going to get converted to saltwater over the next couple of months. And no, it's not for mollies. Make sure you subscribe to see what happens.